Live, where news comes first. This is ABC-7 Extra.
Good evening, I'm Maria Garcia. Welcome to ABC-7 Extra. Glad you're with us this Sunday night. Well, many of you are probably reflecting on your year. Was 2014 good for you? One thing is for sure, the year left us with a lot to think about as a community, a busy news year in local news. And tonight we're going to analyze all the stories that dominated the headlines and really affected our lives. Let's go through the top 7 stories, at least the list our newsroom came up with from bottom to top. Canateo football making it to the state semis, a historic moment that united the community. The immigrant influx, thousands of unaccompanied children flood the border. El Pasoans mobilized to provide them with basic necessities. EPISD announcing possible school closures in the future. The district finally addressing its declining enrollment. And a ton of tension at City Hall. Some city reps refuse to sit next to each other, and the city attorney gets a harsh public rebuke. The tuberculosis exposure of hundreds of babies at Providence Hospital. Parents confused, angry, and alarmed after the hospital says it should have done more when a healthcare worker showed symptoms of the potentially dangerous disease months before. And that contentious dispute between UMC and the Children's Hospital. That controversial $120,000 bonus UMC CEO Jim Valenti received. And finally, the opening of the downtown ballpark, attracting nearly 500,000 people in one season to downtown El Paso. Joining me tonight, El Paso Times editor Bob Moore and El Paso Inc. reporter David Crowder. Going to be a good discussion. You can email us your comments, your questions to ABC7Xtra at KVIA.com. You can also reach us by phone at 496-1775 on Twitter. You can use the hashtag ABC7Extra or tweet me at MariaGABC7. Before we get to the discussion, let's recap those stories more in depth.
Into the corner of the end zone. A terrific grab by the Eagles.
At number 7, Canateo High School's historic football season. The first El Paso area 11-man football team to reach the state semifinals. Such a big deal. ABC7's general manager sent a crew to Lubbock to broadcast the game live and even preempted primetime ABC programming. Something ABC does not allow except in rare occasions. The team lost to Ennis, but they gained the admiration and support of the entire community. Number 6, the influx of about 60,000 Central American immigrants, mostly unaccompanied children, fleeing violence into the U.S. While their arrival sparked anti-immigrant protests in other cities, El Pasoans mobilized to provide shelter, food, and clothing to the minors. At number 5, the announcement that EPISD may close or consolidate more than 14 schools after the district has failed for years to address its declining enrollment. The district says it's actively seeking input from the community before making any final decisions, but some parents say the district isn't doing enough to engage the community.
When you say you're going to involve the community and you want them to be involved, don't give an older generation of people in the community an iPad and say, just take the survey online, because that's not the way they do business.
Number 4, tension at City Hall. The city attorney's legal advice came under question when she advised the city council it could decide to offer Tommy Gonzalez the city manager job behind closed doors. But the tension was also between city reps. When city reps Courtney Nyland, then and Lily refused to sit next to city rep Lily Limon. Nyland cited unwanted touching and grabbing. After nearly a year, though, Nyland went back to her seat when she learned it cost nearly $7,000 of taxpayer money to install a computer and microphone on an empty seat on the dais.
Historically, we've sat in a numeric order. That seat is reserved for District 7, and that's where I would want to stay.
So although it's uncomfortable and although it's unpleasant, and I'm disappointed certain members of council can't show other members respect, I think it's imperative to always have the taxpayer at the forefront of our concerns.
Number 3, Providence Hospital exposing nearly 900 babies to tuberculosis. A total of 8 babies have now tested positive for TB, with 5 of those possibly being false positives because of a vaccine. The hospital CEO admitting it could have and should have done more when an infected healthcare worker showed symptoms months before. And babies under 6 months recommended to take medication that could be hard on the baby's liver and requires rigorous scheduling even if they test negative.
I mean, do we really have a choice? We have to give our kids this medication, and what's the alternate? We don't give it, and what would happen if we don't give it?
Number 2, the contentious dispute between University Medical Center and the Children's Hospital. UMC has said El Paso Children's is insolvent, risking closure if it doesn't take action soon, and owing UMC more than $70 million for staff and services. Children's said it's not risking closure, but UMC is overcharging, and that UMC is not being a collaborative partner, but instead at times hostile.
What we need, what El Paso Children's Hospital needs, what this community needs, is for the UMC and in particular Jim Valenti to act as partners with Children's Hospital in resolving this problem, instead of deliberately sabotaging the hospital as every chance they can get.
The two are currently trying to come up with a solution, and UMC CEO Jim Valenti has been scrutinized for hinting at the possible solution in public. And for a nearly $120,000 bonus, county commissioners say they didn't see coming. Finally, the most talked about story of 2014, the opening of El Paso's AAA ballpark. It's won several awards, including Ballpark of the Year by Ballpark.com. And El Pasoans, even many who were once skeptical, supported the El Paso Chihuahuas, with many of the games sold out, drawing about 500,000 people to downtown El Paso. All right, busy news year 2014. Joining us now, El Paso Times editor Bob Moore and El Paso Inc. reporter David Crowder. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Let's start with number 7, Canutillo making it to state, a first for a high school football team from this region. And I think what really drew people to the story, even people who aren't sports fans or high school football followers, was what it did to the entire community. We saw a lot of newsmakers, a lot of leaders in the community sending positive vibes, sending messages to them, and it just sort of united people.
Well, I think whenever El Paso experiences success, it really kind of pulls the community together. If you go back a few months before that, we saw the same thing happen with the UTEP women's basketball team when they made that great run through the women's NIT. This is a town that very much likes to celebrate success, and even to the point where we'll set aside rivalries. As I wrote in a couple of editorials during the playoff run, we were all Eagles then.
Right, right. And yeah, you had orange fever with the women's basketball team and with Canutillo. Canutillo, a really tight community, and I think it's sort of extended to the rest of the region during this time, don't you think, David?
Well, you know, I can't honestly say I know that much about Canutillo, but I know that this certainly got people's. I think it raised Canutillo's sort of the level of their reputations in a lot of people's eyes to see the football team do this.
Right.
You know, and certainly I agree with Bob. You know, that whenever we sort of get ahead in a game like football, playing against the rest of Texas, that it really is something unusual, especially coming from a school like Canutillo that really hadn't been one of the powerhouses in the past years. It was a real surprise. But those kids have been playing together for a long time. It just tells you what that can do.
Right, right. Our general manager so, into this story, thinking that it was so important, and rightly so it is, sending a crew down there to do live play-by-play and have people who couldn't go to the game watch it from their home. Let's talk about number 6, the influx of Central American migrants into the U.S., a lot of them, most of them unaccompanied children. What I think really struck me about this story is the contrast in the reaction from El Paso versus other cities. In California, you saw a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment, a lot of protests, but in El Paso there was just this massive movement to provide them with basic necessities.
That was really surprising, I think, and it really spoke well, I think, for El Paso. You know, as we sort of kicked around at El Paso Inc., as whether or not the sort of the Annunciation House and Ruben Garcia should have been, El Pasoan of the Year. I think for the kind of reaction that they had, I think it frankly, showed up a lot of places. They see these kind of reactions coming out of New Mexico and Arizona and parts of Texas. Just this sort of reaction against all of these people, whereas here, sort of an open arm kind of thing. I think it speaks just wonderfully about El Paso and who we are.
And immigration is one of those issues where it's such an easy target to politicize, and I think politicians are always going to try to score points because it's easy rhetoric, right, to talk about immigration in a very polarizing way. Really, I think a lot of people have deep-set ideological differences about the way we fix the immigration system, about the process by which we treat the immigrants who come to this country? Do we deport them right away? What do we do? But I think beyond that, these are children, and I think there's a human rights component that no matter what your ideology is, at least in El Paso, people were sort of able to get past that.
Well, I think the immigrant experience is so ever present in El Paso anyhow that we tend to face these issues a little bit differently. And I think David mentioned an important person here that really should be singled out, and that was Ruben Garcia, the executive director at Annunciation House. I was invited by the Dallas Morning News to nominate somebody as a Texan of the Year this year, and I nominated Ruben for that honor because there were a lot of people involved, but Ruben was really the glue that held that together and pulled these networks and put these networks in place that allowed us to kind of quickly respond. And these people were just here momentarily for the most part, and the big task was to get them on to family or others that could help take care of them. And the amount of work that went into that was truly amazing. And I think Ruben Garcia really deserves a lot of the credit for that.
Right.
Our Mother Teresa.
Yeah, that's not a bad comparison. I'm sure he would blush at it, but I think that's an apt comparison.
Number 5, EPISD announcing possible school closures or consolidations in the future. More than 14 schools are on the list. Finally dealing with declining enrollment. The population of EPISD hasn't really changed much in the last 20 years, but we've seen them add to their infrastructure, add schools. But a lot of parents, we heard from a lot of parents saying that 5 community meetings, and we know EPISD added a meeting, but 5 community meetings and a survey online just isn't enough to deal with such consequential decisions. What do you think?
Well, I think EPISD added several more meetings as it went along. It really wasn't even going to be 5 after the study came out. But I think these are very substantive decisions that are going to be made that are going to affect the future of neighborhoods. Schools tend to define neighborhoods, so these are very important decisions that have to be made. They are decisions that, quite frankly, have been kicked down the road repeatedly over the years, and not just in El Paso. The Isleta Independent School District is going through a similar process right now to look at consolidation and school closures. They're probably the most emotional kinds of decisions that you can make, and I think because of that, having as much public involvement as you can is really important, particularly in the case of EPISD, which is in the very unique situation of being run by an appointed board of managers that's going to hand power back to the elected board next May. And so all of those decisions kind of leading up to that handoff are going to be really critical because the district obviously has a lot of challenges ahead of it, and the elected board has to be able to hit the ground running. And if this all is still lingering there and there's turmoil because of it, that's going to make that job even more difficult.
Right. David?
I think what's really scary for El Paso is this issue of what's going on in the central city of El Paso, has been addressed and talked about, I think, going back to the Ray Caballero administration, when they were trying to come up with incentives for infill, for residential development, new development, in the heart of the city.
Well, I mean, Caballero put a complete moratorium for a time on the development in the outskirts.
On the outskirts, and I think, and that was right up until the end of this last administration, practically, as trying to redevelop the heart of the city. And if El Paso doesn't figure out a way to do that somehow, you have all these schools and all this infrastructure and all of this stuff that was set up, for a city that is beginning to empty out, age out, and then with everybody moving to the fringes of the city, this is not a good thing.
Well, and the city is trying to figure out how to pay for the growth. So on top of leaving the infrastructure that taxpayers have already paid for, in some cases are still paying for, you still have to pay for the growth to the outskirts, the water, the services out there, and we know that residents who don't live in the outskirts are subsidizing that growth essentially. Right,
and I think all the neighborhoods we're seeing over where we work at Valles and over where I live, about Putnam School as well, and they're all looking at, really, really plunging enrollment. And what do you do, to get families back in here?
Well, and the other thing is, if you're going to abandon the school buildings, what are you going to do with them? Because if you, and other cities have gone through this, if you just have sort of these rotting out hulks sitting in the middle of neighborhoods, you've then doubled the damage that was done, because it furthers the blight of these neighborhoods and makes it more difficult to recover. And I don't think I've heard a really good explanation at this point of what they're going to do with any buildings they might choose to close or consolidate. And I think that's an important answer that has to be out there for folks too.
Right.
I don't think we've heard any good answers at all about any of this.
Right. And one of the parents I spoke with at Vilas Elementary that you mentioned, I mean, it's a beautiful building. It's a Trost, it's gorgeous, but there's only like 200 children. And what we're seeing is that young families with children just are not moving to the core of the city. They can get a more affordable house on the far east side, far northeast, so they're moving there. So you have these historic, walkable neighborhoods that are losing an anchor to their neighborhood, the schools. And so there's these questions about what's going to happen to these buildings.
But on the other hand, the thing you have to realize is that every dollar that has to be spent heating and cooling and maintaining these buildings is a dollar that's not being spent in the classroom. And so the Socorro Independent School District has this wonderful advantage over its neighbors because it's been able to sort of grow into the pattern that it wants and build schools where they need to build them. And that it really gives them an advantage on things like teacher pay over Isleta and El Paso, which are having to divert all of this money to these buildings. So that becomes a big educational challenge. So it's easy, I think, to criticize the idea of abandoning school buildings, but there's a cost that's being borne by students for keeping these schools open right now and running them at inefficient capacities.
And I think when you hear the president of the Board of Managers, DeMarco, address it, somebody who's dealt with very big budgets, who understands what it's like to deal with multi-million-dollar budgets, it makes sense. There's just two very different arguments to this, and it's a very complex situation. We have to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about all of the tension at City Hall, at El Paso City Hall, plus that exposure, that TV exposure at Providence, and much more, so stay with us. Welcome back to ABC-7 Extra. We're talking about the top stories of 2014. Let's talk about all the tension at El Paso City Hall. City Council this year playing musical chairs. Courtney Nyland sat away from Representative Lily Limon, citing unwanted touching and grabbing. Representative Ann Lilly took her spot, but then a few months later said, I don't want to sit here either. And then there was this whole dispute about who's going to sit there. Nobody wanted to sit there. Courtney Nyland finally said, I don't want to spend any money building a new microphone. I'll sit back there even though it's going to be unpleasant. So there's just been a lot of tension there.
Well, David's covered City Council for a long time, and
Decades.
I think can talk about tension at City Hall that would make this look like next to nothing.
Well, I don't know that I've seen anything quite this good that actually was inside, within the council and city attorney's office and such, quite like this. There were some things that went on during the Wardy administration that were pretty interesting, but I'm not impressed with this, with this particular story line, just because I think it's a lot of moaning and groaning, a little bit of power plays and little personalities and such like that. I don't know that they've been having a significant effect on actual policy. I think things are getting back to normal, I think, at this point.
Yeah, I think that tension has really
and
eased
nothing
up.
really happened out of this. It was a bit, frankly, it was childish. And that's what was surprising. I think, past councils, I think, have been more, frankly, grown up about a lot of this. And to see this kind of behavior is just sort of amusing, but it's not really significant. It doesn't do the city government any good.
I think there are some underlying issues there, and I think that the issues that played out in public are sort of stand-ins for other issues that
proxy war.
I think that's a good description, right. And I think there's been a constant tension between many members of the City Council and Mayor Leeser that sort of stayed below the surface. And we may see that begin to come more to the fore in the coming weeks.
They publicly deny that. They
Sure.
say it's not a power war between those who are in favor of Mayor Leeser and those who aren't.
It's not that at all. I think there a large number of the council members, for differing reasons, have disagreements with the mayor, which is going to be natural in every case. So I don't mean to suggest that there's a block of council members that are opposed to the mayor and a block that are supporting him. I think the mayor so far has sort of been his own guy and really has not even tried to form a coalition, and he may need to actually look at doing some of that down the road. But I think there are some issues that we'll be seeing coming to the fore early next year, particularly around the arena and some of the decisions that have to be made on the quality of life bond issues and how we're going to proceed with those as a community, where you may see some of those tensions develop a little bit more. So yeah, I think the musical chairs thing was not the community's best moment either this year. But unlike David, I do think there's a real issue here that I don't criticize your choice of this as one of the top stories. I think there are some issues on the council that for the good of the community we need to get beyond, but I'm not sure we're going to get there.
Yeah, and I don't think the musical chairs in and of that scenario, I don't think in and of itself is one of the top stories, but I think it's a testament to, I think, how divided the council was at some point this year. And we saw, that very public rebuke of the city attorney. Courtney Nyland said that office had become very politicized and that the city attorney overstepped her bounds. And then we saw, Representative Lily Limon saying that the city attorney was inappropriately rebuked in public and was humiliated. So, I mean, it's just... And that played out for several weeks, and it was kind of unclear, what the purpose was. But ultimately, we saw that everything was resolved, and that they said issues that had been in the back burner were suddenly getting done very quickly after that.
So. Well, I think the other thing you're going to start seeing is Tommy Gonzalez really sort of putting his stamp on things. And obviously the city attorney does not report to the city manager, but I think Tommy is a very skilled veteran city administrator. And I think whenever you have the transition like you've had in the past year at an important position like this, people are going to be uncertain and try to feel their way around. And I think Tommy, through the reorganization he just did, and now through helping the council put together a strategic plan and everything, I think you're going to see him start to exert himself a bit more in an appropriate way. I mean, obviously he's the employee of the mayor and council, not their boss, and so he has to be careful about that relationship. But they're going to rely on his expertise for a lot going forward, I think. Okay, we have to take a break. We'll be right back. We're talking about Providence, the dispute between UMC and Children's Hospital, plus the ballpark, so stay with us. Welcome back to ABC-7 Extra. Let's talk about the TB exposure at Providence. Nearly 900 babies potentially exposed to the dangerous disease through an infected healthcare worker. A lot of alarmed parents. I spoke to a parent this week whose baby was exposed under 6 months, and so he tested negative, but he still has to get the medication, and it's a very rigorous schedule. I mean, they come 3 times a week, 7 in the morning, and there's questions about the risks to the baby's liver. So a lot of parents, I think, really struggling still to this day with this.
I think that Ebola's nasty business, and or TB. I was thinking it's our own little Ebola, thing right here in El Paso. I think it scared the dickens out of a lot of people. The whole city, in fact, the people thought it was going to spread, and there was just really an amazing event that took place at one hospital, and it shows what happened, what can happen if they're not sort of watching all of the protocols and all of the standards and keeping up, just the way you have to do it, and this can happen. But it hadn't happened very many places.
Right, and I think what was alarming to some people was the timeline. That the time frame that the information came out in, and then also the way the numbers fluctuated. There were initially fewer children who were potentially exposed, and then it kept on growing. And that's not an unusual situation in a healthcare crisis either, that you're going to see these fluctuation in numbers. And I think I think the hospital sort of stumbled badly out of the gate, obviously, in terms of communication. And obviously they stumbled badly by allowing
a worker in the nursery to create the situation in the first place. But I think they kind of got their footing after a while. But it's a very scary thing to have, especially when you're dealing with newborns. To you're a new parent and you've got all this excitement going on, and now you've got this news that there's a possibility your child was exposed to tuberculosis. So it's a very unnerving thing, and healthcare workers are going to respond as aggressively as they can. And I think parents have to make informed choices as they're going along with these treatments. And I think the best news out of all of this is that we haven't yet seen an active case of TB develop as a result of this exposure. So whether it's through good fortune or whatever you want to call it, this situation is a bad situation. There's no question about it. But I think we can all be grateful it wasn't much worse.
Right. There's 8 latent cases at last check, but 5 of them most likely false positives because of the vaccine.
I think everybody learned a lot.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely. I remember it was my first week back at work from maternity leave, my baby born at Providence.
You were there, that's
right.
right.
And he was one of the babies exposed, and it's just, it's such a, it's just an unnerving feeling to know that your baby was maybe potentially exposed to something dangerous. Really, really scary stuff. Let's talk about UMC and the children's dispute. This got really heated really quickly. What are your general thoughts on this one?
Well, it's a huge issue. I mean, you're talking about the future of a facility that taxpayers voted to create several years ago, and its future is very much in question right now. It's easy to let this become sort of personality disputes, which I think this issue has at times. But there's a big issue out there over how or if we're going to be able to have a children's hospital continuing going forward. And I think there's a lot of frustration in the community because all of these negotiations have sort of been going on behind closed doors, and nobody knows what direction we're going to go. But this is going to be, I think, one of the most serious issues that we're going to deal with going into the beginning of the new year is what are we going to do to get a children's hospital that's going to be able to function and carry on its mission going forward. And at the same time, UMC has a number of issues that it has to deal with too. The Children's Hospital is among them. But so you have these 2 very important institutions in the community that have some serious question marks around them.
And I think we saw UMC CEO Jim Valenti becomes one of the targets of all of these questions. When the story was developing, we heard from doctors at the Children's Hospital and some staff members saying, when we did this agreement between the Children's Hospital and UMC, Jim Valenti helped draft it. He was one of the main people who really developed the agreement and the services and the staff that UMC would be providing to the Children's Hospital. So it doesn't all fall on the Children's Hospital. And then, of course, we saw the controversy with his bonus, which, he's gotten a bonus sometimes much bigger than this every year since he's been there. It's very common in the industry, but I think it was just obviously the timing. The timing this year after more than 50 people were laid off, I think that's what made people so upset.
And I think as well on that, I wouldn't want to put all of this on Valenti.
Right.
But I think that the issue of just this email issue that arose when Commissioner Carlos Leon wrote to him and said, is anybody getting bonuses? And he answers back, nope, not this year, and nobody got them last year. But it turned out that yes, this year, and yes, everybody got them last year as well. I'm not sure that that's ever really been explained satisfactorily.
Well, it's actually been explained several different ways, none of them that add up.
Right, I don't think it adds up, and I still think it'd be nice to get that. I think it'd also be nice to understand what exactly happened with children and where the sources of the true losses are. I would think, and I think a lot of people are hoping that some kind of a merger of some sort of an operation where the children's is going to be brought into the wing of UMC, at least for a time.
It can't. I mean, and there's a political reality there where voters were promised when the Children's Hospital was created that beyond the bond for building the hospital, there wouldn't be any taxpayer commitment to this. So politically, and this is where Jim Valenti's very soured relationships with Commissioners Court really come into play now. Politically, the county, you've had several commissioners and the county judge who've been very explicit that there will be no taxpayer bailout for Children's Hospital, and by that they mean no taxpayer expenditure. So, Jim has talked about creating an umbrella 501c3 under UMC, but simply replacing one 501c3 with another 501c3 doesn't seem to be a path to success. So I think there's a real challenge out there.
So then the question becomes is whether a children's hospital is really viable, in this community, at that point.
Yeah, and I mean,
I think people might stand up, and I think that what is understood as the political realities may actually shift.
Yeah, but I don't think you're in a position in the community where you can just let that children's hospital fail right now.
That's what I mean.
So exactly. it's a very, very difficult situation.
So you got all this quote-unquote debt, that is owed to UMC, but is it really debt? Is this really money that's coming out of their pocket and that is causing them, to effectively lose money, or is this billage? That you agreed to pay this much rent and you're not paying it, but it's not necessarily costing us, as much as this. So are they going to cut a deal? Are they going to cut their losses and then carry on? See, so I think something is going to happen, that at least is going to be proposed. We don't know what it is yet, obviously, but I think we've had an idea of where they're headed.
Right, and I think it'll be interesting to see 2015 where the attention shifts. We saw the proponents of the Children's Hospital who said we need this, and there's no doubt we do need a Children's Hospital in El Paso. It's unfortunate when we see children who have to travel out of town. That's not a question here, but the question is, did it grow too fast? Did we invest? Were there too many doctors hired? Did it grow at a pace that was just not sustainable? And I think those are some of the questions that are going to be asked. And I think some of the people who supported this are going to be asked that question going into 2015. Number one story, we're running out of time, ballpark. It was our top story last year, our top story again.
Right.
And there were a lot of questions in our newsroom. What is the top story? Should it be UMC and Children's, or should it be the ballpark? But I got overruled. A lot of people said it was the ballpark. That was the top story. Got a ton of awards. What do you guys think?
I would say the ballpark, but frankly I would throw in something about downtown as well. I think that it may be all related. I think that everything that has taken place there, I think a lot of what people wanted to happen downtown for the last 30 years, is actually starting to happen with the hotels, the apartments moving in, the restaurants, the new retail, and all of that, which seems to be on the coattails of the ballpark. And then you have everything, with the ballpark going back to all of the issues last year with with all of the email, and if you bring all of that sort of stuff forward, it is just it's a huge story. And I think it's had a huge impact on it, or I think it has been having. I think it's had a large impact on El Paso, and certainly is the top story.
I think the biggest thing to me about the ballpark is it sort of changed the conversation in El Paso about what we can be, and it's the conversation has been kind of muddled at times because of the way the ballpark came about. But when you walk through the stadium and you listen to people, one of the things you hear is, I don't feel like I'm in El Paso anymore. I feel like I'm gone on vacation somewhere. And that just frustrates me to no end to hear that. But I do think it's changed the expectation in El Paso and changed the level of aspiration about what we can do and what we can try to do. And I think for that reason, and putting aside my bias that I'm a season ticket holder, because I'm a big baseball fan, I do think that it's changed the nature of the conversation about what El Paso can be.
Okay, we have some tweets before we go. Eduardo says, a children's hospital without any taxpayers' expenditures is delusional. And then another tweet from him, for something to be common does not make it right or fair. He's talking about Valenti's bonus. Giving a health administrator a bonus when over 50 workers are laid off is not a personality issue. I don't think we were referring to that. But we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us. David Crowder, always.
Thank you. Bad shoulder here.
Lightning, thank you so much. And thanks for joining us on ABC-7 Extra. We'll see you next week.